It's that time of the year again. A brand new KDE Plasma version is upon us, probably already out by the time you're watching this or will be released soon, as always depends on your distro. Plasma 6.4 is a big release in terms of the number of changes and features, and for people who thought that Plasma maybe wasn't that polished, well, this is the version that is here to change all of that, because virtually every single change in there is there to make your life way easier when navigating and using the system. So we'll go through everything that changed, and we'll also go through our sponsor, ProtonMail. You all know what Proton is. They give you an end-to-end and zero-access encrypted suite of services that is focused on making sure that your stuff stays yours. So they have an email account, but they will also give you contacts, a calendar, online storage space, a password manager, a VPN. You're free to use any of these services or all of them. Your base account is free and gives you all the privacy protections that you would expect and all the security features that you'd expect from an email account. But of course, they also have paid plans to go further if, like me, you need a bit more storage space or you need more email aliases and a bunch of stuff along those lines. So the link, as usual, is in the description to check out ProtonMail. They're really solid. I use them for all my personal email storage space and communications, and they just haven't let me down yet. So let's begin with changes to the Plasma desktop itself, and there are a lot of those. Okay, so first, there are the first bricks of the session restore protocol being implemented on Wayland, meaning that when you shut down your session, if you elected at the very least to turn on this option in the desktop session settings, choosing to launch the applications that were open when the session was manually saved or in the last logout, well, you're gonna have the exact same applications with the exact same window size on the exact same place on the screen or the exact same virtual desktop at the very least. Now, this doesn't work for the position in the app. If I was in the settings in Discover, this will not be remembered. It will just open the Discover app entirely, but not specifically the page in which I'm in. And also, every toolkit and application being developed with this toolkit needs to opt into that. For now, as far as I could tell, only the default KDE apps seem to be using it, but other applications will need to opt into that when the Wayland protocol is entirely finished and published for everyone else. So you can see that as the first step towards a full session restore. I would expect applications to really start opting into it now that KDE actually supports it. I would also expect this protocol to be implemented in GNOME once it's stable and accepted inside the Wayland protocol's repo as well. Another thing that virtually every other desktop I know of has, but KDE didn't, is time of day wallpapers. You can now elect to install and use time of day wallpapers, meaning they will automatically switch between a light version and a dark version depending on the time of day where you live and what you actually set up on your computer. KDE's custom tile editor that you can bring up by pressing Meta plus T or Super plus T, basically the Windows or the Command key on your keyboard, it now supports custom tiling layouts per virtual desktop, meaning you can have very different ways of tiling your windows based on the virtual desktops you're on. Now, in KDE, inside of the little status and notification settings, here you can customize which application display which little status icon. And previously, applications that were a permanent fixture of these that had a icon but didn't really handle it all that well, they couldn't be fully disabled. You now can decide to completely disable the tray icons for these apps. Of course, if these applications heavily rely on their system tray icon, disabling it might lock you out of certain features and functionality. For example, if I disable this for Discord, then there's no real way for me to completely close it unless I change that setting inside of Discord itself. So it might break a few things, but at least you have the option to never show those icons if they clutter your system tray or status notification panel. In terms of editing the desktop's layout, you have a new option. First, for the floating panel, you can decide to have no floating panel at all, meaning it will just stick to the bottom of the screen. You can have a panel with its applets that are floating, but you can also just have the applets floating, meaning that you do have a fixed panel at the bottom, but your applets don't just stick out of the panel, they just float above it, which is, I think, the best of both worlds. If you don't really like the floating panel entirely, which I absolutely love it, at least you can have nice looking little applets that aren't just fully square and coming out of the panel, which always looked kind of weird to me with Breeze's visual style. In the same panel configuration options, the little icons and visualizations that you have more accurately reflect the actual position of your panel. So if you set your panel to the left, all the little visualizations here will also show your panel to the right. Same if you go to the right, left, or top, or whatever other position you want to place it on, it will reflect that. So it's a bit more understandable and legible. All these options also look, I think, a bit revamped. I'm not sure if all of them were, but a bunch of them were and are nicely animated, so it's clearer what you're actually changing in terms of options. Another nice little change is the little widgets that you decided to place. For example, here you have Bluetooth. It's technically part of these status and notifications until you decide to put it yourself on the panel. If you do so, it will no longer hide itself when the system thinks it's not relevant to show it. They assume that since you placed it manually on this panel, then you actually want it seen all the time. In terms of the Bluetooth widget as well, you can now display a little badge icon to show the number of Bluetooth devices that are connected to the system, if you want that. As per notifications, the history will now show the action buttons for every notification that is stored there. So instead of just having a bunch of useless stuff, now you can actually see the actual options that you had when the notification was displayed on your screen. If they didn't have any button linked to them, then instead you'll see an activate button that, when clicked, will do what the notification would have done if you had clicked on it. Another thing that they added in terms of notifications is persistent notifications. Some apps like timers, for example, will display one that is always visible. You can now send those to the history if you don't want to have them always on your desktop, but you still want the notification to be easily accessible. Now you also have a bunch of changes to the little widgets that you can use. For example, in the media player, you now have the option to change the playback speed directly from that media player, at least if the application supports that playback speed. I tried it with Firefox and YouTube, it didn't work, but with casts and my own podcast, it does seem to be supported, at least by this application. Another change that will be really nice for people with touchscreen is a bug that I reported when I did my touchscreen experiment, which is you cannot scroll this list with your finger properly because it will try and drag widgets out. So now on touchscreens, you can scroll with just one finger, and to drag these things out, you have to hold them and then drag them, which should fix a nice little usability problem. The disks and devices little panel will now automatically check when you mount a new disk if there are some file system errors, and will prompt you to correct them immediately so you don't have to do this manually. Now, if you don't like seeing the little audio indicators in your task manager because it is kind of cluttery, if you don't need that, well, you can now disable it. You already had the option to just not show the media and volume controls when hovering over something, but now you can also decide to not even show the indicator either, so you're free and uncluttered in your taskbar. Another nice little shortcut is the ability, when right-clicking an option on the taskbar, to just not have any title bar or window frame for that application. This could be useful if you just want something to float and hover somewhere. You can do this from any icon in the task manager and, of course, restore it afterwards. Another change is that by default, Meta plus Tab will invoke the Alt-Tab switcher. They just wanted to make sure that the Meta key was used for every global interaction on your system, so they mapped this shortcut as well as Alt-Tab, which still absolutely works, of course. There are a few other changes. There's a desktop effect that is now turned on by default, which is dimming the rest of the screen when there's a pop-up asking you for your admin password, so it's a bit more noticeable. Sticky notes now also have some kind of translucent panel around them, but this is a first step because in Plasma 6.5, sticky notes will actually have a nicer way of being used when you add them to your panel directly. And also, if your mic is muted when an application opens and tries to access that mic, you'll get an on-screen notification telling you that said mic is muted, so you're not wondering why no one is hearing what you're currently saying in your meeting. In terms of apps, there are other changes. First is Dolphin. They changed the default icon. It's no longer just a folder. It now has a little dolphin thing. I don't know why. It was pretty clear that this was the file manager, but well, I guess there's a Dolphin now. Also, the interface of Dolphin has changed a little bit. The main path bar still works as it did, but it now has a better outline that I think looks pretty good. When you're trying to launch files that can be executed, you now have a nicer little dialog to let you either launch the file, cancel, or if it's a file that you could also open with a text editor, for example, you'll get a button for that. And also the option to launch executable files without asking has been rephrased, and it also tells you where you can undo that change. Now, due to a change in the KDE frameworks as well, you can also have more options. For example, when you're creating a new folder, you automatically have little icons that let you choose a custom icon, or you have the icon picker to go change whatever you want to use for that exact folder, which is pretty cool. When you're creating a new file, you also get the MIME type icon next to it. All those little dialogues now look much nicer. Another cool thing is that when you're transferring files, the system will no longer suspend until that transfer is complete, meaning it will just not stop your transfers from actually happening. Also, if you were not a fan of this little menu when you moved anything by drag and drop in Dolphin, you can now elect to always move stuff when you drag and drop them instead of always having that little menu to pick what you want to do. The default system monitor now displays some more useful information by default, although in this testing version it is broken out of the box, maybe because I'm running this in a VM, not sure. You'll also notice that in the Applications tab, you have the background services now grouped under a single item, which makes it easier to actually parse the list of what's currently running and what is just a service that you probably shouldn't touch. If you want the actual details, you still have the Processes tab, where you have every single thing that you might want to look at. In the history page of the system monitor, you now have by default the difference between total CPU usage and per core usage, and you also now have GPU usage as well if you have an AMD or Intel GPU. Because of course NVIDIA is not supported yet because NVIDIA kind of sucks sometimes. Spectacle, the screenshot utility, will now by default open in the rectangular selection mode, but you can obviously change that and you still have access to all the other screenshots that you might want to do. It's now much less of a window that's open like an application, much more of a system feature that's overlaid on top of things, which I'm okay with, but I'm sure some people will not really be fans of that. It was kind of nice looking before, so don't really know why they felt the need to change that default. Another change that you'll see in the default apps is in the menu editor. It now has a nicer hamburger menu with all the more options lumped in here if you want that. Of course, as always, you can still always restore that to a normal menu bar if you prefer. They use the new tab styles as well, and they will now let you open an application using the discrete GPU by just checking a checkbox if you have a dedicated GPU on your system. Inside of Discover, when you're installing an application, you'll see a progress bar straight in the applications page instead of having to go look right down the bottom here where that progress was displayed. Now it's a bit easier to just know if something is actually happening instead of just having the installing text and the progress bar over there. Also in Discover, if you have updates available for your system, the notification that will be displayed if you enable that will let you start the update straight from the notification instead of having to open Discover and then click on the update button. Just a little quality of life improvement. Now, in the settings, you have a brand new animations page, which lets you choose all the animations for your system. Instead of having to go into the desktop effects and finding all the effects for all the different animations, they are now grouped here. You have a global animation speed slider in there as well that you can change. And so you can just have fun and just change the stuff really easily. And it's just way simpler to access all of this. They also give you a nice shortcut for desktop effects, but apparently the main goal is that most of the effects that are animating the desktop need to be placed in some settings pages instead of using the desktop effects page, which is really there for extra stuff, not for the default stuff that the desktop runs on. In the display settings page, you'll notice that if you only have one display, you just don't see the display arrangement anymore, which is fine. And if you do have multiple displays, then you have tabs up top that let you switch between them. If your system supports HDR, you also now have a brand new HDR calibration wizard, which I think is really neat for people who have access to that. Now, in the legacy X11 app support, so basically X-Wayland settings when you're running on Wayland, you can now allow X11 apps to control the pointer and the keyboard without asking for permission. This should fix a bunch of issues, most notably with games. I had that problem on my gaming PC where every time I opened the game and I opened the controller, it would ask if I wanted to let that game use that controller to control the pointer, and I could not use the controller to confirm that I wanted that. That was annoying. This should fix that, and it should also fix some broken applications that just don't know what to ask for because they've never really been developed for the Wayland or X-Wayland interface. Obviously, allowing any app to access anything without permission is not secure at all. That's why X11 is not secure in the slightest, but at least you have the option. There are smaller changes like the little animations when you check something or when you switch to another radio button. These are now enabled in Qt Quick window, so basically it's just a matter of consistency. If you change the settings in the double click interval, for example, you now have a little test zone to make sure that your settings work or not. Plasma 6.4 also cleaned up a bunch of the names of the options and actions you can trigger with keyboard shortcuts. Now, in the kickoff menu, you also get little green dots and green new indicators next to applications that you've recently installed. I'm not a big fan of how this looks. Black text on green doesn't quite look right for me and doesn't seem contrasted enough. I would much rather they had used the little orange indicator that you can enable when you select the highlight change settings in the system settings. I think this looks better and people understand what this means. The green new thing, not sure if it's really that legible. There's nothing absolutely groundbreaking in Plasma 6.4. The biggest change will be the session restore protocol, which once every app started implementing this, will be absolutely fantastic and will just really help in day-to-day operations, at least for me. This is the big missing part of Wayland. Having that is nice. But also, it's a lot of quality of life improvements. Hidden settings that were kind of useful are surfaced now in their own pages and they're more legible. The file manager is a bit less annoying and gives you a few more options when trying to create a new folder, when moving stuff around, looking at graphs, when you're transferring files. That's something that is now in the notification when you're transferring files. The system is just more intelligent, a bit more smooth, I'd say. There's just some quality of life benefits to using this version of KDE, and this cements my opinion that KDE Plasma right now is the best desktop environment that you can use on Linux. That doesn't mean others are bad. I just think KDE is a bit above those other desktops because you have all the simplicity you need to configure the basics, but every time you need to configure something deeper, you do have that option. It's relatively easy to find with the search in the settings once you've identified how it's called, and it just has all those options that are accessible graphically without having to look online on how to do it. I just think it's a fantastic desktop, and the buggy mess of the past of the KDE 5 era or very early Plasma 6 era is just a thing of the past. It's actually really stable. Doesn't mean it's bug-free, but it is very nicely polished and finished. So to me, at least, KDE is the best option you could recommend to any new beginner on Linux. Of course, GNOME and others are still fantastic options as well, but KDE, I think, really accomplished that perfect mix between features, simplicity by default, power under the hood, and now also stability, and I think its aesthetics are just fine. Not the best, not the worst, it looks good. Just like today's sponsors, devices look really good as well. It's Tuxedo Computers, you know about them by now. They make laptops, they make desktops that ship with Linux out of the box. They have something for every price point and every need. Plenty of options to configure your device with the internals, with the keyboard layout, with your logo engraved on it. I only use their computers to do everything. Everything that you see or hear from me is done on one of their laptops, which is the Tuxedo Infinity Book Pro 16 with a dedicated NVIDIA GPU running Tuxedo OS and KDE Plasma. Everything I do with gaming is done on one of their Tuxedo Cubes, unless it's a Switch game, which I play on a Switch. Anyway, You know what to do, the link is in the description. If you need a new computer, you want to run Linux on it, you want to support a company that contributes to Linux, Tuxedo is there, the link is down here. Anyway, thanks for watching this video, I hope you enjoyed. Let me know what you think about Plasma 6.4 in the comments. You also have all the usual YouTube buttons, you know why you should click them to make the channel go bigger, and you also have the usual link section to support the channel and gain a bunch of cool benefits if you do so. Thank you all for watching, and I guess you'll see me in the next one. Bye!